Hi, my name is Holly West, and I'm the author of the Mistress of Fortune historical mystery series set in 1776 London. And I'm here today with my good friend Josh Stallings. He is the author of the Moses McGuire trilogy, the Anthony Award nominated memoir, All the Wild Children, and the Lefty and Anthony Award nominated Young Americans, a disco heist set in 1976 San Francisco. His short fiction has appeared online and in numerous anthologies, and Crime Reads named his latest novel, Tricky, one of the most anticipated crime books of 2021. And it's the book that we'll be discussing today. So, Josh, first I want to say thank you so much for being here. So good to see you.
Oh, it's good to see you, and thank you for asking me. This is awesome.
So let's just start. Tell us about Tricky.
It's the story of Cisco, a gang assassin, East LA, accused of possibly murdering his best friend. And the hiccup is he got a lot of scars and got beat. And he either is or isn't suffering from brain damage and intellectually disabled at this point. He doesn't remember, or he says he doesn't remember what happened. But our detective is an LAPD homicide detective who rolls up on the scene, sees this apparently gangbanger leaning over a dead body, and cops pointing guns at him, and it goes from there. And it is what's fundamental about it is that it is about half the people who know him now, who know Cisco today, don't believe he could do anything. Say he couldn't have done this. There's no way. He's a gentle soul. The police and the sheriffs and the people from the prison system say, look at his record. This is an evil, smart, brilliant killer. And Madsen, the detective, needs to sort this out. He comes in with all of the ideas that any cop would have and thinks this guy's probably conning him, but he also believes in justice, believes that his job is to get to the truth. And so it's just about trying to discover who is this person, and in it, what makes a human? What is our humanity?
Tricky asked the question, does your past define you forever? And Cisco, like you said, he's a former gang member with a long and violent rap sheet. But as a result of a terrible beating, he now has the intellectual intelligence of a child. At least that's what he's portraying and what the people around him think. But as Cisco's creator, do you think he would have transformed if he had not suffered such a devastating brain injury?
I will tell you one of the sources for this novel, and it answers that question. Forever ago, my grandmother was a social worker. She's been gone forever. So we're now going back into my early days. She told me a story as a social worker. There was a young man who was in the gangs. He was a criminal and a thug. He lived with his mother in an apartment complex with a lot of old people, and he would rob people. He was a bad person. He got depressed and tried to kill himself. And what he wound up doing was shooting himself in the head and knocking his intelligence down to a 6 or 8-year-old, somewhere between that and 15-year-old. It's hard to get intelligence because you're also dealing with sexuality and some other things. So it's complicated, but he also turned into a great guy. He took care of the old people in the community. He got married to a girl with Downs. He lived next door to his mother and took care of her the rest of her life. And it struck me when my grandmother told me this story. I just kept thinking, are we the sum of our history, or is there something in the hard wiring that was changed? So we know that you can have brain injury and suddenly you can't see motion. So we know that the brain does things like that, but I think there is some real proof that there's part of our personalities also in that wiring. It isn't all psychology. So so that's my answer. I don't know that he could have gotten there without fixing some of the wiring.
You answered that question perfectly. It makes sense that there's something in that injury that rewired his brain, maybe back to when he was just a more innocent, kind person before all these things happened.
Part of it, and I want to be clear, and it's clear in the novel at some point, Cisco was at 14 put in mainstream adult population prison. We did that back when he would have been that age in California. So who he became was a direct result of how he was treated. You put
Absolutely.
a kid into a prison with adult, and it was a max prison, which we did it. We put him in Pelican Bay, one of the hardest prisons in our system, and we put 14-year-old kids in there. So I don't want to say, oh, he was a gangbanger, that means he was evil. He was a kid who got screwed. And then, so I think maybe we did, by getting beaten, he was wired back to who he was before all that happened. And maybe it was in forgetting that, forgetting his history, maybe allowed him to be someone different. I don't know enough about it, but I know it's possible.
Knowing the basis of that character is very interesting to me, having read the book,
Yeah,
because you see how that all fell into place for you. And I knew that this book was dedicated to your son, Dylan, who was born with an intellectual disability. So I was coming at it from that point of view, but knowing that the actual character of Cisco was based on a different situation, that adds a layer to the story.
they came together like so many things in my life. The opening of the novel, policeman pointing a gun at a guy who doesn't know what they're doing, happened to my son with me and my wife. And I knew when that happened, and that was 10 years before I wrote it, I knew that I would have to work through this in a novel.
Yes.
That's And one of the things I'm most proud of is that I captured in Cisco Dylan's humor. I captured so much of who he is as a guy. And to capture that made me really happy. That was something I was proud of. And so it's all these things that are from my life came together. My grandfather was a cop and one of the best men I know, one of the most moral, good men I know or knew. I still think I know him because I hear his voice in my head still. You know, there's all these different things that come together. I wondered, why am I writing a police story? I grew up doing criminal acts and hanging out with criminals. My father was in jail for civil disobedience and armed robbery. So it wasn't all charming and hippie shit.
This is your first procedural, right?
Yeah.
So, did you learn anything significant or shocking about law enforcement during your research?
First off, I did a lot of reading and a lot of interviewing, and I met the head of the SMART team / PET team. It's had two different names, which is the psychological clinician combined with a police officer, to try and find out how things work. And he said something that I've heard from cops, and it didn't hit me till then. I said, my son was almost killed by an officer. An officer was yelling and pointing his badge. You know what this means? You know what this means? And my wife said he doesn't. And the cop pushed her back and said, ma'am, we got this. And I said that to this guy, and he said, yeah, we got some knuckleheads. And the term knucklehead is a police term to say for the guy who could have killed my son. That's not a knucklehead. That's a murderer. And so I had to look at some phrases and things that we use in crime fiction, like suicide by cop. That's not a thing. That's a cop killing somebody. It's their job not to do that. So the knucklehead thing, though, really stuck with me. That's a shitty thing to say to a father who just told you that one of your officers almost killed his son. And what he also told me about LAPD that actually helped make sense of it, the language is just who they are, was he said, a big police force, one of the things that we are is very specialized. If you are good on the range, you go into SWAT. If you have empathy, you go into the SMART team. Problem is, the guys with most empathy won't roll up first, and you can't call them in as a parent. You don't get to call in, say, any psychological unit. The officer who rolls up has to have enough empathy to see what's going on to call them in. But he's never going to be the guy who's most set up to deal with mental illness. And I have to say, thankfully, we are in a nice street in Eagle Rock. We're a middle-class white family, because I don't know that Dylan would have made it out otherwise. He presented as crazy, but if he was a man of color, he would have presented as a threat. Is
that why you made Cisco a man of color?
I did that partly because I don't know how to write about LA and not write about, I live in Northeast LA. That's where I live. That's what I write about. And you're going to write about Chicanos if you write in that world. Yes. And I wanted to do it partly for that. Partly it's a community that I love. It's so funny. I sent the book I had a friend that I came up with in getting sober 30 some years ago, who was a shooter in a gang. and we're good friends. And we've been good friends all these years. He's also one of the best men I know. I sent him the book and said, Nino, tell me where I got it wrong. There's some phrasing and some language things. And he said, and we don't say this. And I had called weed primo and then his cousin cuz. And he goes, cuz is a black thing. We call our cousins primo. So there were some language things. But the sweetest thing he said, because you're seeing that community through Nell's eyes, you're the perfect man to tell it because you've danced close enough to the fire, but you're also not of the fire. And if you had written it from Cisco's perspective, we'd have a different discussion. But he said, you're the perfect guy to write it. And I think that taught me a lot about the way that I think about writing other cultures and all. Absolutely. Is there's a difference between being in I was asked early on, would I write chapters from Cisco's perspective? And I didn't. And the reason why, I'm not saying other writer couldn't or wouldn't. For me, Dylan doesn't have the intellect to read it and understand if I got it right. Yeah. And I'm not going to do a voice inside a head of somebody I can't then find out if I got it right.
Yeah.
It's unfair. So yeah. I know his behaviors. I don't know what he thinks, like most humans. But in this case, it's a group I wanted to be fair with.
Absolutely. And I understand why. I think this is a conversation that, a lot of writers have, and some get kind of pissy when it's suggested that they can't write any character they damn please. Well, no one's saying that, but we are saying that you have responsibilities when you are portraying characters that are, especially when they're marginalized, people of color, people whose experience, if you're going to be profiting off of somebody else's life story, basically, if you don't get it smack on right, then you shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't have the hubris to think you can. This is my feeling about it.
I agree with you. Here's where it gets weird. When I wrote Young Americans, there's a character, one of my favorite characters is Valentina. Mm-hmm. Transgender woman, badass ex-Marine. She is a superhero in a novel, and I love her. She's based on somebody that I knew as a teenager. I was asked by another writer, was I going to get a sensitivity read on that? And I said no. I said, and here's why. I've captured Octavia, a woman I knew growing up, the best I know how. Now, another transgender person might read it and go, well, that's not the transgender person I know, but no group is a monolith. Mm-hmm. Did I capture this character? If I was worried about, did I get the language? Did I do something? Particularly if I was writing more modern, but I grew up in San Francisco. I was a teenager in the sort of height of the gay, wild, everything world. So there's a lot of that I know. If I was writing from Valentina's perspective, a spinoff about her, I might need to. It might need something different. It's just, it's combining for me the idea that I can't get inside somebody else's head culturally, but also I could ask 6 Mexican Americans, all of my relatives, my brother's wife and kids, to read Tricky, and none of them would understand LA gang culture.
Absolutely.
So they'd be the wrong, it's not monolithic. They'd be the wrong person to ask that question of.
Well, I think the goal is to strike a balance. And my personal feeling is that writers should err on the side of caution. If I want to write authentically, I'm going to need some help sometimes, depending on who I decide to portray.
Yeah.
I think it will only make our work better.
Yeah.
And the other side of that is promoting own voices, diverse voices. Let them tell their stories. They don't need me to tell their story.
Yeah, no, I agree. For me, it starts also with reading, mm-hmm. with reading books by authors that aren't you. Mm-hmm. Reading books from authors that are good that aren't you.
Yeah,
I think that helps a lot. It helps to broaden what we're talking about. It promotes other writers but also it helps me that's how I get to know people the best, is through reading. I was running into this thing where I've been thinking about magical realism. And I'm reading a book about Paraguay, weirdly. But it's a beautiful big book, and a Latina woman writer. And it's the magical realism is beautiful. I was reading a Celtic book. I was thinking about Ghost of Belfast, and that's really Celtic magic realism.
Absolutely.
And I was thinking, what have we Protestants got? Did we kill magic?
See, what's interesting about these interviews is you always go off on these tangents that I think are kind of really interesting.
America's a weird thing. It's weird because the rest of the world forever used to look at us like we were these wild rebels. And the truth is, it was founded by Puritans who left England because England wasn't uptight enough for them.
My next question kind of goes along with what we've been talking about. From the outset, Detective Madsen shows himself to be more evolved than some of his fellow officers. And yet he has a lot to learn in his journey with Cisco. And I got the feeling, though, that his wokeness was more about pragmatic policing and his experience with how to handle suspects, etc., than it was a natural part of his worldview. And so would you say that that is a fair thing to say? And were you thinking about this type of thing when you were developing his character?
Yes, and I will address that. But first, when I first wrote the book, you look for in a character, what are their flaw? What am I going to be dealing with? What are they playing with? And the first draft of it, I sent to my agent, and he was a womanizer. And she just called me up and she said, you can't do that. I said, what do you mean? I love all the people in my life of any power are women, which is really helpful. She said, well, in the world we live in right now, every woman will turn off from him. She said, we just, in Me Too times, that's not a good character. It's think again, get deeper. And I went, okay, okay, I get that. That wasn't very deep. Let me go further. The next thing that came up when the first couple of chapters, and it came from her and then from Chantel, the book's editor, both had me take out levels of the R word. Because I made the mistake of thinking because I'm of the community, that I'm of the community. And I didn't know I'm not of the community Dylan's in. I'm an ally of that community. Mm. And that means I can't use that word. And it's used very sparingly. Well, I was using a lot with Madsen, thinking, and then there'd be the great moment where he learns not to use it, right? And he does in here. But she said that it's in there 15 times in the first 2 chapters. If you read that, what would you feel? I said, I'd be turned off. She goes, okay.
Yeah.
And so that's wokeness that I've filtered into him because it's mine. The other is he's not woke. He is pragmatic. He's a good cop. He looks at things. He isn't trying to prove that the Mexican gangster is a good guy. He's trying to find out what is true. And he really is a man who believes in the truth. So yeah, if he's woke, it's because the truth is leading him there. Mm. And he's a different man at the end of the book. He has changed, as has Cisco. It turns out Cisco has some dark shit he's got to look at that he's not looking at. Yeah. And for him to evolve, he needs to, even in his own way, he needs to come to grips with it. He asked, am I a bad man? Do I have to be a bad man? Is an interesting question.
I know that the world at large gets it wrong when it comes to people with intellectual disabilities. But I wonder if one of the things they get the most wrong is their ability to grow.
My son Dylan, he's 40. I have a 40-year-old son. That makes me just old as dirt. But anyway, he grows slowly, but never stops. He never stops changing. It's just slower. You have to notice it. I see him change in many ways. The way that his community, the intellectually disabled community, has been portrayed and really upset me for so long was either they weren't at all, or they were sometimes portrayed as villains, like in The Village, or often as the magical retarded person. And that was, my mother said to me, he was sent to teach us. He's an angel sent to teach us. This is after at 26, Dylan suffered from schizoaffective disorder, which often comes right around 26. And he went from being a perfect gentleman to losing his mind and winding up in a mental hospital. And my mother said that, and I thought, so you believe in a God that tortures my son to teach you? A, that's egotistical, and I hate your God. There's no good way for me to get, but that's a very common view. They're here to teach us. The magical, intellectually disabled man has wisdom that he sees that we don't.
Christianity, at least, doesn't want, they paint suffering as always a reason for it. And if you are suffering, it's because God is doing this so that you will grow, you will become a better person. Now, you might become a better person as the result of your suffering, but there's no way that I'm going to ever consider it divine. It's a coping mechanism. There's so much suffering in the world that we need some way, our humanness needs some way to think that there is a divine purpose for it. And honestly, there's not.
I try and stay out of most religion because I know that it is needed, and I know there's beautiful things inside of religion. Each faith has beautiful things, and each one of them has a lot of bullshit. I remember in my first Moses book, he said something about, if there's a God, I'm coming for you. You better vest up because I'm coming for you. And it was a statement that it wasn't that he didn't believe in God, he just didn't trust the son of a bitch. And that was, I realized, as true as how I felt at the time about faith of any kind.
Which was a more challenging personal journey? Writing your memoir, All the Wild Children, or writing Tricky?
Tricky. The memoir I wrote, it was the hardest. All the pain came after I wrote it. I used a thing to write it where it was really written as free form as I could make it. It spilled out of me as free and as easy as I could. When it came out, I got a lot of heat, and that was not as much fun. Tricky was hard because I've never written that kind of book. Every book that I write is different. Every book that I write is something. One of the things I have to find in it, my writer self. There's the story self, and I have to find something I care enough about to spend a year on or more on. And so I have to lock into that. But then the writer self, I have to find, what in it haven't I done before? What do I need to learn? And it's why every freaking book is harder than the one before it, because I've suddenly set new challenges. And I work harder with every book. I thought more with Tricky than any book I've written before. Mm-hmm. I spent more time deeply thinking about the issues in it.
Yeah.
I spent a year reading about police in America, getting an opinion on it, and thinking about, what do I feel about policing? Like, I couldn't write, and none of that is in the book. I had to know a bunch of stuff before I could sit and write it.
Absolutely.
All of those things. And then to sit and write it, the writing wasn't as hard, but it was hard getting it right. And I felt a real weight to get it right.
It's a great book. You took us on a journey that was both entertaining and yet enlightening. And I appreciate that in a book. I think I've read all your stuff, at least some version of it, because Josh and I used to be part of the same critique group. So I've read quite a bit of your stuff, and I saw a departure with Tricky.
It is by far the best thing I've written, I feel. It is, excluding what I'm writing right now, which is better than it.
And I love to hear that. I think as writers, we're constantly trying to go the next step, challenge ourselves a little bit more. And it does get harder. And sometimes it feels like, how can I ever accomplish what I want to accomplish? But somehow we do.
I tried to be an actor when I was a kid. That was my plan. I studied theater and I thought I was going to be an actor. I wasn't very good at it. But what I learned about it that was important was, there is something added by that moment of stepping out on a stage, that moment of total, I want to throw up. People talk about stage fright, does it ever go away? I talk to older actors, they go, nah, if it goes away, you should quit. And I think that's why pushing yourself to do a book you don't know how to do every time, it adds something to the work that is an energy and an excitement that I wouldn't have otherwise. I have to say, tip of the hat to the three women who made this book as good as it is. My wife, Erica, is the first editor, and she beats the hell out of my work. She de-dyslexizes it, for one, but she also puts these notes like, you can do better, and circles a whole page. Like, fuck! That's a compliment and a curse.
Yeah.
And my agent, Amy Moore Benson, is amazing, and she had a lot to do with the book that we got to. And the editor at Agora, Chantel, she got something to me I never understood. I hate this comment. You need to show, not tell. And I'd say, I'm a fucking storyteller. What do you mean? Show, don't tell. But what I understood was the last 3 chapters were written like a coda music montage in a movie. They weren't real. And what she was saying wasn't show, don't tell in some way I don't understand. But what I finally got was what she was trying to say was we are disengaging from these because they feel like the music and credits are playing over them. And they weren't real scenes. So I had to go back and rewrite the end of the book, and it was so much better. And I knew there was a problem and nobody could find it. And I finally just said, okay, I guess I don't know what it is. And she nailed it. And it's a better book because of those 3 women. So some people don't need editors. I obviously need 3.
Hey, you know what? I think we can all benefit from a good editor.
There is also a deep respect from all 3 women that I work with who they set up and propose problems and explain them until I understand the problem. And then they trust me enough to go away and fix it.
On that note, I just want to say that Tricky is out from Agora Books and it's available wherever books are sold. Can you talk briefly about what you're working on now?
I will give you the briefest because otherwise I'll get beat up by my agent. It's set in LA, 1984 Olympics. And nice. It's also that year a whole bunch of things happened. It was also one of the not the early, it was earlier, but it was also the beginning of fentanyl. It was LA dealing with homelessness and rounding up the homeless. There was a big robbery by the new 8-year-old organization, the DEA. They robbed a bunch of their own places in LA. It was this like a moment in time where all these things happened. And so the book is about that, I
can't wait to read it. That is like you were saying earlier before we started that it was like 280 pages or something.
It started out as 200 and it would have been, until I started editing, it would have been 600 or 700 pages.
Yeah.
Huge.
Well, sometimes you need all that clay to make the statue.
I've never done that, but I've never written a long book before.
Yeah.
So I was panicked. But it's, now it's editing and there's a point because I never know, I don't write with structure, so I never know what's going to happen in the book.
Mm-hmm.
You know that about me. There is a point where I am so terrified in the middle of a book that I wrote the wrong book and I don't know how to get out of it. So editing is actually a pleasure to me because I have a whole book and it works. It just needs refining. But I'm not this terror every day of, will this book work?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I think every writer's process is different, but yeah, there is that moment of this terrifying moment where it's like, this will never be something that is saleable or that someone would want to read but then you always work your way out of it.
Yeah. But that doesn't, Erica says, as I come to her in the middle of a book and say, I'm done, I can't write this book, I'm going to throw it away and start over. And she says, okay, this is the, I guess, 5th or 6th time you've been through that. And you always find a way. And I go, I don't need to hear that because this time it's different.
Exactly.
And it's not.
She's right. No, but it probably is different. But what's the same is that, yes, you will get through this moment.
Yeah.
This too will pass.
This too shall pass. Good. Absolutely. And if not, I'm here to help you with my suffering, okay?
Exactly.
God sent me to teach you, Holly, not to go this path. To outline.
I'm so grateful God sent you to teach me because I have learned so much from you, both as a person.
From watching my mistakes be painful, you have...
That's awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to end it here, but thank you so much for joining me today, Josh. I had so much fun.
Thank you. This is awesome.
If you like this video, tap the like button. And if you'd like to see more, be sure to subscribe to my channel. See you soon. And Josh, I'll see you around.
You will. Bye.
Bye.